The emergency beacon had been screaming into the void for 19 straight hours, and every ship within range had ignored it. Kael knew this because the beacon's cracked receivers still logged passing traffic, cargo haulers, patrol frigates, mining convoys, one diplomatic cruiser. They had all altered course the moment they identified his transponder. Some accelerated away immediately. Others paused long enough to send automated legal disclaimers before vanishing into hyperspace. One captain had even transmitted a survival probability report calculating exactly how many resources would be wasted attempting a rescue. 4.7 lives worth of fuel, 2 drones, a 32% chance of hull contamination, insufficient return on investment. Kael stared at that final message for nearly an hour before the heating system died. Now frost crawled across the inside of the cockpit glass like pale spiderwebs, while the dead star outside filled half the sky, enormous and dark red, its dying light bleeding through the wreckage drifting around him. Thousands of shattered ships orbited the collapsed sun in silence. Ancient war graves, broken stations, split carrier hulls, rotating skeletons of civilizations long erased from the galaxy. And somewhere inside that graveyard, Kael's cargo vessel spun helplessly with one engine missing and life support collapsing section by section. The irony would have been funny if he still had enough oxygen to laugh. A warning tone pulsed through the cockpit. Biofunction support disabling. Left arm motor response. His fingers immediately went numb. Kael closed his eyes for one long moment as cold spread slowly through his shoulder. The ship's medical systems were shutting down non-essential neural functions to preserve oxygen for the brain. Efficient, rational, standard emergency protocol across the coalition. His own people had invented the system. His own people had also abandoned him here. Not pirates, not enemies, not some monstrous alien force lurking in deep space. The evacuation order had come directly from his convoy commander 3 sectors ago after the reactor breach crippled his freighter. The rest of the convoy had voted to detach his ship before the radiation spread through formation. The decision took them 112 seconds. Kael still remembered how calm the commander sounded while condemning him to death. Your sacrifice preserves 43 operational lives. Not your life matters. Not we are sorry. Just mathematics. Cold, elegant, efficient mathematics. Another warning flashed red across the controls. Oxygen remaining, 1 hour, 43 minutes, and 11 seconds. Kael swallowed slowly against the dryness in his throat. Every breath already tasted metallic. The air recyclers were failing faster now. Carbon dioxide crept to the cabin like invisible poison, making his thoughts sluggish around the edges. Outside the cockpit, the graveyard drifted endlessly through crimson darkness. He could see fragments of ancient battles frozen forever in orbit around the dead star, broken cruisers from species that no longer existed, half-melted stations fused together by weapons powerful enough to scar moons, entire civilizations reduced to floating debris, because somewhere, sometime, someone calculated that destruction was worth the cost. Maybe the whole galaxy worked that way. Maybe kindness was just a childish fantasy weaker species, invented before reality crushed them. The beacon suddenly chirped. Kael's eyes snapped toward the console. At first he thought oxygen deprivation was making him hallucinate. The signal repeated 3 seconds later, louder this time. An incoming scan pulse had just pierced the radiation storm surrounding the graveyard. Impossible. No sane captain entered the Black Halo expanse voluntarily. The neutron turbulence alone shredded most navigation systems. Even military ships avoided the region unless absolutely necessary. Yet something was out there. A shape emerged slowly through the crimson dust clouds beyond the wreckage field. Massive, angular, moving directly toward him instead of away. Kael frowned weakly as unfamiliar symbols appeared across his damaged sensor display. The transponder translated them one letter at a time. Terran rescue vessel. His breathing stopped. Humans. Every story he had ever heard about humans crashed into his mind at once. Reckless explorers, unstable soldiers, emotional primitives who violated every accepted law of resource logic in the galaxy. A species so irrational, they sometimes died trying to save complete strangers, which meant only one thing. The ship approaching him was either full of fools or full of the most dangerous beings Kael had ever encountered. Then the human vessel accelerated straight into the radiation storm that every other ship had fled from, and Kael realized with growing disbelief that they had not come to salvage his wreck. They had come for him. The human ship did not slow down as it entered the storm. Kael watched the fractured cockpit glass as blue-white bursts of radiation crashed against the vessel's forward shields hard enough to illuminate the surrounding graveyard. Ancient wrecks emerged from the darkness in flashes of violent light before disappearing again into crimson dust. Any coalition captain would have rerouted immediately. Even military cruisers treated the Black Halo expanse like cursed territory. The Terran ship drove deeper into it without hesitation. Warning alarms suddenly screamed across Kael's failing console as the turbulence intensified around his drifting freighter. Magnetic debris fields twisted through space like invisible tides, dragging dead metal with them. Entire sections of ancient wreckage collided nearby, spinning past his cockpit close enough for him to read faded insignias from extinct civilizations. The Terran vessel maneuvered through the chaos with shocking precision. Not efficiently. Beautifully. That was the word that disturbed him most. The ship moved like its pilots trusted instinct more than algorithms. Instead of rigid tactical adjustments, it flowed through the wreckage with small, unpredictable bursts of thrust that no coalition navigation AI would ever recommend. Twice it rolled sideways through debris gaps so narrow Kael physically flinched watching it. Then another radiation wave slammed into the vessel's shields. For a brief moment, the human ship vanished entirely inside a sphere of electric blue fire. Kael's stomach tightened. No ship should have survived that. The flames collapsed seconds later, revealing the vessel still advancing directly toward him. A transmission burst crackled through the static. Unknown cargo vessel. This is Captain Elias Ward of the Terran rescue ship Resolute Dawn. Your beacon is unstable, but we have your position now. Hold together for a few more minutes. The voice was calm, not emotionless calm like coalition officers trained to suppress stress. There was warmth buried underneath the professionalism, concern, urgency. Human. Kael hesitated before activating his transmitter. You should leave. Static crackled, then silence. Finally, the captain answered. Quieter this time. That bad, huh? Kael frowned weakly. The response made no sense. Most species responded to danger reports with calculations, risk assessments, probability trees. Humans responded like conversations mattered more than protocol. The radiation spikes are worsening, Kael warned. You are entering a debris convergence zone. Your survival odds are falling every second. Yeah, the captain replied. Our navigator keeps reminding me. Another violent tremor shook Kael's freighter as nearby wreckage collided. Somewhere behind him, metal screamed apart. The human captain continued speaking anyway. You injured? Kael blinked slowly. My ship is dying. That wasn't what I asked. For the first time in hours, Kael did not know how to answer. Coalition emergency protocols prioritized operational data above personal condition. Damage percentages mattered. Crew value mattered. Survival probability mattered. No one asked if you were hurting. My left arm is non-functional, Kael admitted finally. Oxygen failure progressing. Mild carbon poisoning. Mild. Another voice interrupted somewhere on the human bridge. Sir, his telemetry is catastrophic. Copy that. Captain Ward muttered away from the transmitter before returning. Listen carefully, Kael. We're going to dock manually because your port systems are dead. Once we attach, my crew will stabilize atmosphere first. After that, medical extraction. You already lost drones reaching me. Kael said carefully. Silence. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But real. You detected that? The radiation echoes exposed debris patterns. Your approach vector changed afterward. Another pause followed. Then someone on the human bridge laughed quietly. Not mocking. Impressed. Sir, a woman's voice said over the background chatter. You weren't kidding. He's sharp. Kael's eyes narrowed. How many humans were listening to this conversation? The captain exhaled slowly. 2 drones lost. 1 shield array damaged. Worth it. Worth it. The phrase hit Kael harder than expected. Nothing in the coalition was measured that way. Costs existed to be minimized. Sacrifices existed to preserve greater assets. No rational captain described losses as acceptable for a single dying cargo pilot, unless humans really were as irrational as the stories claimed, or unless the stories had failed to explain something far more dangerous about them. The Resolute Dawn finally emerged fully through the storm clouds, and Kael felt genuine shock tighten his chest. The vessel was enormous, not military enormous. Different. Its hull carried visible repair scars from dozens of older missions, yet every damaged section had been repainted carefully instead of hidden beneath armor plating. External floodlights illuminated sections of the ship where magnetic clamps carried emergency supply pods, rescue shuttles, and civilian transport modules. It looked less like a warship and more like a machine designed to survive disasters. A moving sanctuary, which raised an entirely new question. Why would humans build something like this? A proximity alarm suddenly flashed across Kael's console. Another ship had entered the outer edge of the graveyard. This one moved differently. Sharp acceleration bursts. Coalition engine signature. Kael's blood went cold. "No!" he whispered. Captain Ward heard the change instantly. "What happened?" Kael stared at the incoming transponder codes appearing across his damaged display. He recognized the registry. Convoy security vessel Talon Crest. His people. But they had not returned for him. The realization hit before the sensor data finished processing. The Talon Crest was armed for interception. "They tracked my beacon," Kael said quietly. "How many?" "One ship." Kael swallowed. "That is all they need." The human bridge fell silent for half a second. Then Captain Ward spoke in a completely different voice than before. Not warm now, not gentle, focused. "Helm," he ordered calmly. "Prepare defensive rotation." Warning lights ignited across the human vessel as hidden weapon systems unfolded beneath its hull plating for the first time. And somewhere deep inside the radiation storm, the approaching coalition ship transmitted a priority command directly to the humans. "Surrender the exile immediately, or be classified as hostile." The message repeated 3 times across every open frequency. "Surrender the exile immediately, or be classified as hostile." Kael stared at the transmission in disbelief while the human ship continued closing the distance toward his dying freighter. The coalition vessel approaching through the storm was not broadcasting rescue authority codes or emergency support clearance. It was transmitting military enforcement signals. They truly had come to retrieve him as property, not as a person. The realization should not have surprised him. Coalition law treated abandoned personnel as forfeited assets during survival emergencies. Once a citizen was officially sacrificed for operational preservation, their survival created legal complications, insurance reallocations, command liability disputes, resource ownership conflicts. Dead citizens were simpler. Dead citizens could not question the math. "Captain," a voice muttered somewhere aboard the Resolute Dawn, "their weapon systems are active." Kael closed his eyes briefly. Of course they were. The Talon Crest would not risk negotiation inside the Black Halo expanse. Radiation interference made long-range combat unpredictable. Coalition doctrine favored overwhelming force before complications emerged. But the humans still did not retreat. "Unknown coalition vessel," Captain Ward transmitted evenly. "This is civilian humanitarian ship Resolute Dawn operating under interstellar rescue accords. We are conducting medical extraction. This individual has been legally designated expendable." The coalition commander replied instantly. "You are interfering with internal coalition enforcement. Expendable." The word landed harder than Kael expected. Not because it was cruel, because hearing it aloud suddenly made the cruelty impossible to ignore. Captain Ward remained silent for 2 seconds too long. Then he asked a question no coalition officer ever would have asked. "Kael," he said quietly over private channel, "did you choose to be left behind?" Kael frowned weakly. Choice was irrelevant. "That wasn't my question." The human captain kept doing that, ignoring systems, ignoring legal language, ignoring the entire framework Kael had spent his life inside. "No," Kael admitted finally, "I did not choose it." Another silence followed aboard the human ship, not uncertain silence, angry silence. The Coalition commander transmitted again. Human vessel, surrender the exile now. Coalition reclamation teams are authorized to use force. Captain Ward answered immediately this time. No, just one word. Flat, calm, absolute. Kael's eyes widened. Coalition military ships did not receive refusals from civilians, especially not from younger species still considered politically unstable by most galactic powers. Yet the humans had refused without hesitation. Warning sirens echoed faintly through the Resolute Dawn as power signatures intensified across both vessels. Through the cockpit glass, Kael saw the Talon crest emerging fully from the storm now. Dark gray armor plating, sharp angular weapon arrays. Efficient design stripped of unnecessary structure. A predator built by mathematics. The human ship looked completely different beside it. Broader hull, visible civilian sectors, external docking bays. Too vulnerable, too open, too human. Captain, another crew member warned, they're locking firing solutions. We see it, Ward replied calmly. Kael felt genuine confusion beginning to overpower his fear. Why were the humans still here? The logical outcome was obvious. The Coalition vessel was faster, better armed, and legally protected under regional authority treaties. Even if the humans escaped, they risked diplomatic sanctions for interfering with Coalition enforcement. No rational species would escalate conflict for a dying stranger, unless the stories about humans were wrong. Or worse, unless the stories had been incomplete. A sudden impact rattled Kael's freighter hard enough to knock loose sparks from the ceiling above him. Docking clamps. The humans had reached him. Before he could react, new lights ignited along the corridor outside his cockpit as atmosphere tubes connected manually to the wreck. Fresh oxygen hissed into the dying ship in loud, uneven bursts. Kael inhaled sharply. Real air, warm air. His lungs burned from the sudden change. Then the external hatch alarms triggered. Someone was coming aboard. Bridge to medical team. Captain Ward said over the comms, his voice still impossibly steady despite the Coalition ship targeting them. You are cleared, proceed. You're seriously sending people over there while they're aiming at us? Another crew member snapped. Yes. They could fire any second. Yes. A frustrated silence followed. Then a woman sighed heavily. Copy that, Captain. Boarding now. Kael heard magnetic boots clanging faintly through the corridor beyond the cockpit. Fast. Controlled. Human. His pulse quickened unexpectedly. Why did that sound comforting? The cockpit door finally groaned open halfway before jamming against twisted metal. White emergency lights spilled through the gap. Then a human arm forced the door wider. The first thing Kael noticed was the size difference. Humans were larger than Coalition database projections suggested. Not towering giants, but physically solid in a way most spacefaring species were not. Broad shoulders, dense muscle structure, movements that looked almost too forceful inside confined environments. The woman stepping into the cockpit wore dark gray rescue armor scratched by fresh radiation burns. A medical kit hung from one shoulder, while a plasma cutter smoked faintly in her opposite hand. She looked directly at Kael, and immediately smiled, not strategically, not diplomatically. Relieved. There you are, she said softly, like she had been worried she might arrive too late. Kael stared at her in silence. He could not remember the last time someone looked happy simply because he was alive. The human crouched carefully beside him. Name's Lieutenant Mara Vance. Medical officer. Her eyes moved quickly across the failing systems around him. You picked a hell of a place to break down. Another violent tremor shook the ship, this time stronger. Mara's expression changed instantly. Captain, she snapped into her comms. That wasn't debris. Ward's answer came immediately. It's the Coalition ship. Warning shot across our bow. Kael felt his stomach tighten. The Talon crest was escalating, and the humans still had not left. Mara opened her medical scanner while muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. Kael blinked slowly. You should go. She looked up sharply. Not happening. They will destroy your ship. Maybe. She injected something into his arm before continuing. Still not leaving. The medicine spread warmth through his frozen nerves almost instantly. Kael inhaled sharply as sensation returned painfully to his fingertips. "How are you all this insane?" he whispered. To his surprise, Mara laughed. Not offended, not defensive, just tired. "You have no idea," she said quietly. Then the ship-wide alarms aboard the Resolute Dawn suddenly shifted tone. Kael noticed a change in Mara's face immediately. Fear, real fear, not from the Coalition ship, from something else. "Captain," someone whispered across the comms. Ward's voice answered low and sharp. "I see it." Kael turned weakly toward the cockpit glass. At first, he saw only storm clouds and drifting wreckage. Then something enormous moved beneath the crimson dust surrounding the graveyard. And for the first time since the humans arrived, Captain Elias Ward looked genuinely worried. At first, Kael thought the movement beyond the wreckage field was another drifting cruiser rotating through the storm. Then the stars disappeared behind it. The shape sliding silently beneath the crimson dust was too large to process immediately. Ancient debris fields shifted around its passage like leaves caught in an ocean current. Entire wreck fragments rolled aside without collision, pulled by invisible gravitational distortion spreading outward from the object itself. The Coalition ship saw it too. For the first time since arriving, the Talon crest stopped advancing. Its weapon locks disengaged. "What is that?" Mara whispered. No one answered her. Kael stared at the fractured cockpit glass as fragment of memories surfaced from old Coalition archives. Restricted stories. Half-dismissed reports from deep space navigators. Entire patrol groups vanishing near dead systems without distress calls. Black ships. Most species considered them myths born from radiation hallucinations and battlefield paranoia. But myths did not bend gravity. The thing emerging to the storm carried no visible engines, no running lights, no recognizable weapon systems. Its surface looked wrong somehow, like fractured obsidian absorbing surrounding light, instead of reflecting it. Long skeletal structures protruded from its hull at unnatural angles, giving the illusion of a corpse drifting through space. Yet it was moving directly toward them. The human captain spoke calmly despite the tension tightening every voice on the comms. "All hands. Threat condition amber. Medical extraction continues." Kael turned toward Mara in disbelief. "You are still extracting me?" Mara looked offended by the question. "Well, yeah. The unidentified vessel still exists whether you're dying or not." Another impact shuddered to the freighter as docking clamps tightened. Kael could now hear activity flooding through the human ship beyond the corridor walls. Orders. Footsteps. Emergency systems activating deck by deck. Yet underneath the rising tension, something else caught his attention. No panic. The humans moved quickly, but not fearfully. That felt impossible. Coalition crews became colder under stress. Narrower, more detached. Fear transformed into ruthless efficiency because survival demanded it. But aboard the Resolute Dawn, tension seemed to do the opposite. The humans became louder, more connected, more alive. Engineering the bridge, a voice crackled over the comms, reinforcing shield harmonics. Navigation reporting debris drift acceleration. Another added, weapons online. Civilian deck secured. No one sounded resigned. They sounded ready. Kael frowned faintly as Mara worked rapidly beside him. "Why is your ship carrying civilians?" "Because we rescue people." "That is not an answer." "It kind of is." She finally managed to cut away part of the twisted restraint pinning his legs beneath the cockpit console. Pain shot violently through Kael's side. He hissed through clenched teeth. Mara immediately steadied him with surprising gentleness. "Easy." Kael stared at her hand for half a second too long. No calculation. No hesitation. She touched him like helping was instinctive. That frightened him more than the warship outside. The Coalition commander suddenly returned to the comms, his voice sharper now. "Human vessel. Unidentified anomaly detected. Coalition command authorizes temporary tactical cooperation." Kael almost laughed despite the pain. Of course. The moment fear entered the equation, the Talon crest shifted priorities instantly. Coalition doctrine adapted to survival probabilities above all else. Captain Ward's response came after a brief pause. "Appreciate the offer," he said evenly. "But you threatened my crew 3 minutes ago. You are misinterpreting procedural enforcement." "Oh, I understood it perfectly." Kael blinked slowly. The human captain sounded calm, but underneath the calm sat something dangerous. Not anger, judgment. The coalition commander must have heard it too, because his tone hardened again. "Your vessel is outmatched. Cooperation benefits us both." "Funny thing about humans," War replied quietly. "We don't cooperate very well with people who abandon civilians to die." The channel went dead. Mara muttered something under her breath that Kael's translator refused to process. Then the entire freighter lurched violently sideways. The massive black vessel had moved again. Closer now, Kael finally saw details emerging beneath the dust clouds. Thousands of surface markings covered the hull in repeating geometric scars, as though entire civilizations had carved warnings into its armor over centuries. Some looked ancient beyond comprehension. Others looked disturbingly recent. Mara noticed them too. "That thing's been here a long time," she whispered. "No," Kael said quietly. She looked at him. "It has been hunting a long time." The words escaped before he realized he believed them. Silence followed. Then alarms exploded across every open frequency simultaneously. Not human alarms. Not coalition alarms. Unknown signals flooded the system in sharp, distorted pulses that bypassed standard translation protocols entirely. Kael's damaged console flickered violently as corrupted symbols filled the screen. The black ship was transmitting. And somehow every vessel in the graveyard understood the message emotionally before the systems could decode it logically. Terror. Pure ancient terror. Kael's chest tightened instinctively. Mara froze beside him. Even the coalition ship stopped maneuvering completely. The transmission repeated again. This time the human systems partially translated fragments. Life detected. Resource inefficiency identified. Reclamation authorized. Kael felt cold spread through his spine. The black ship was not scanning military strength. It was evaluating worth. Outside the cockpit, the giant vessel slowly unfolded. Entire sections of it hull open like mechanical ribs, revealing dim red lights deep inside structures large enough to swallow cruisers whole. Smaller shapes began emerging from within the darkness. Drone craft. Hundreds of them. Captain Ward's voice cut sharply across the comms. All civilian sectors to lock down immediately. Combat teams prepared defensive positions. Kael stared toward Mara. "You did not fight that." She met his eyes calmly, while helping release the final restraint trapping his leg. "Probably not." "Then why stay?" For the first time since boarding, Mara hesitated. Not because she lacked an answer, because the answer seemed so obvious to her that explaining it felt strange. Finally, she shrugged lightly. "Because there are people on this ship." As if that explained everything. Maybe to humans. It did. Suddenly another voice erupted across the human comms, urgent and breathless. "Captain, we have a problem." Ward answered instantly. "Report." The refugees saw the external scans. The crewmen swallowed hard. Some of them are trying to open escape hatches. Kael frowned weakly. "Refugees?" Mara's expression darkened. For the first time since meeting her, genuine exhaustion showed through the cracks. "This wasn't supposed to be a rescue mission," she admitted quietly. Then another impact slammed through the Resolute Dawn hard enough to shake the entire docking corridor. One of the black drones had just attached itself directly to the human ship. The first scream echoed through the human ship 3 seconds after the drone attached itself to the hull. Not panic. Pain. Kael heard it faintly through the docking corridor, while emergency lights instantly shifted from white to deep crimson. Every sound aboard the Resolute Dawn changed at once. Bulkhead doors slammed shut automatically. Deck alarms thundered across the vessel in overlapping waves. Somewhere far deeper inside the ship, metal groaned violently under impact stress. Then came the voice of Captain Elias Ward. "Containment teams move now. Civilian sectors remain sealed. Nobody opens external access points under any circumstances. No hesitation. No confusion. Just immediate coordinated response." Kael stared at Mara as she pulled him upright beside the cockpit doorway. "What are those things?" Her jaw tightened. "We don't fully know. That answer should concern me more than it does. Yeah, she muttered. It concerns us too. The corridor outside the freighter was crowded now with human crew members moving rapidly between equipment stations. Kael immediately noticed something strange about the way they handled fear. Coalition crews became quieter under pressure. Emotion narrowed. Individual survival instincts took control. Humans became louder, not chaotic, connected. People shouted warnings while helping each other into armor. Medics moved alongside armed security teams instead of retreating from danger zones. One engineer sprinted past carrying emergency power cells, while another crew member physically stopped him long enough to secure the loose strap on his shoulder armor before shoving him onward again. Tiny acts, small delays, completely irrational. Yet somehow the human response felt more stable than any coalition emergency operation Kael had ever witnessed. Another tremor hit the ship, this time followed by gunfire. Short bursts, then silence. Mara immediately touched the comm unit near her ear. Deck 7 report. Static answered her. Kael saw the concern flash across her face before she buried it instantly. They breached the outer hull. A voice finally crackled back. Drone units are inside maintenance corridors. How many? Pause. Unknown. That single word changed the atmosphere around every nearby human. Not fear. Focus. Kael had seen soldiers react to danger before. Coalition troops relied heavily on predictive combat algorithms and tactical certainty. Unknown variables usually trigger withdrawal patterns until probability stabilized. Humans reacted almost offensively to uncertainty, as if not knowing something irritated them personally. Mara began pulling Kael toward the docking tube, connecting the ships. Move. I can barely stand. Then lean. You are under attack, and you're still bleeding internally. Kael almost argued again before another human suddenly appeared around the corridor corner, carrying a frightened child in his arms. Kael froze. The child was not human. Small, thin, pale blue skin beneath an oversized emergency blanket. A refugee. The human carrying her looked barely older than 20. What happened? Mara demanded. Panic in civilian Sector 4. The young crewman replied breathlessly. Somebody tried forcing evacuation hatches open. The child buried her face against his shoulder while shaking violently. Kael stared. No military vessel carried refugees during combat operations. No sane captain risked civilians during encounters with unknown hostiles, which meant only one thing. The Resolute Dawn had never intended to enter combat at all. Mara must have seen the realization forming in his expression. We were evacuating survivors from the Kepri colonies, she admitted quietly while continuing to guide him forward. Medical convoy mission. Kael frowned weakly. The plague systems? She nodded once. Cold realization spread through him. The Kepri colonies were collapsing. Entire sectors had been quarantined after a bioengineered neural plague spread through their population centers weeks earlier. Coalition analysts predicted casualty numbers in the millions before containment stabilized. You diverted here, Kael said slowly. Mara avoided his eyes. Another violent tremor shook the ship before she finally answered. Yes. The docking corridor suddenly felt colder. How many people are waiting for those supplies? Mara stayed silent. Kael stopped walking despite the pain tearing through his side. How many? Her expression hardened with visible frustration. Enough. The answer hit harder than any accusation. The humans had delayed an active medical evacuation mission to rescue one abandoned stranger drifting inside a death zone. One stranger. Kael's throat tightened unexpectedly. That makes no tactical sense. You keep saying that like it matters. It does matter. No. Mara snapped, turning toward him sharply for the first time. What matters is that you were dying alone out there. Kael stared back at her. Humans kept doing this. Every conversation eventually collapsed into the same impossible wall. No matter how complex the variables became, no matter how catastrophic the risk calculations looked, humans always reduced everything back to one simple point. Someone needed help. To them, that ended the discussion. Another burst of gunfire thundered somewhere overhead, this time followed by a scream cut abruptly short. The child in the crewman's arms whimpered softly. Mara closed her eyes for half a second before touching her comm again. Bridge, medical extraction complete. Returning with survivor. Captain Ward answered immediately. Copy. Get him to Civilian Bay 6. Kael frowned. Civilian Bay? You need treatment. You need soldiers. We have soldiers. You are losing crew members because of me. Silence followed. Mara looked genuinely angry now. Before she could answer, another voice interrupted across the comm system. Captain! Someone shouted desperately. We just lost X7. Those things are inside the reactor access corridors. The bridge erupted into overlapping voices. Kael expected panic. Instead, he heard coordination. Fast. Ruthless. Human. Seal blast doors. Evacuate engineering teams. Reroute power away from compromised sectors. Get civilians below deck. Deploy countable emitters now. Then Captain Ward cut through all of it with terrifying calm. No retreat from reactor access, he ordered. If those drones reach core systems, everyone aboard dies. Kael felt something shift inside him. The human captain was willing to sacrifice himself if necessary, not symbolically, literally. And somehow every human aboard that ship already understood it. No votes, no calculations, no debates over acceptable losses. Just trust. The realization unsettled Kael more deeply than the enemy outside, because coalition society could not function this way. Their systems required hierarchy, resource weighting, survival mathematics. Everything depended on measure value. Humans operated on something far more dangerous. Belief. Suddenly, every screen in the corridor flickered violently. The unknown transmission returned. Life detected. Inefficient preservation behavior confirmed. Correction required. Kael's blood ran cold. The black ship was studying them, learning them. And then the main external display feed activated automatically across the corridor wall. Everyone stopped moving. Beyond the storm cloud surrounding the graveyard, something even larger was emerging behind the original black vessel. Not a ship, a fleet. Ancient silhouettes unfolded slowly through the crimson dust like predators waking beneath deep water. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Kael realized the humans were not the target. Humanity itself was. The fleet moved without engines. That was the first thing that truly broke something inside Kael's understanding of space warfare. No thermal signatures. No propulsion trails. The black vessels simply emerged through the storm as if the darkness itself carried them forward. Ancient debris fields parted around their hulls in perfect silence, while crimson radiation bent unnaturally across their surfaces. Every screen aboard the Resolute Dawn filled with distortion. Threat markers multiplied faster than the tactical systems could process them. And then the human crew did something Kael never expected. They kept working. Not because the situation looked survivable. It did not. Even coalition battle groups would have retreated instantly from odds like these. The fleet outside could erase the Resolute Dawn without effort. Yet humans continued sealing civilian sectors, continued carrying supplies, continued treating the wounded. One engineer even stopped beside a terrified refugee child to hand her a small silver pendant before sprinting back toward the failing power relays. Kael watched the child clutch it tightly like a shield. The ship shook violently again. This time the lights died completely. Darkness swallowed the corridor for one terrible second before emergency systems activated in dim red pulses. Somewhere overhead, metal screamed as another drone breached the hull. Then came automatic decompression alarms. Deck 9 exposed. Bulkhead failure in Section C. We lost atmosphere in 2 corridors. The human voices remained fast but controlled. No one sounded resigned. That terrified Kael more than screaming would have. Mara dragged him into a crowded transport lift, descending deeper into the ship, while armed security teams pushed upward toward the breach zones. Several were visibly injured already. Burn marks, blood, torn armor. Still moving, still climbing toward danger. You're sending wounded personnel back into combat? Kael asked. One of the humans looked over his shoulder while reloading a weapon. Welcome to rescue work. The lift doors closed before Kael could answer. As they descended, the ship-wide displays flickered intermittently with tactical feeds from the battle outside. The Coalition vessel Talon Crest had joined defensive formation beside the humans now, its commanders apparently deciding survival outweighed pride. But even combined, both ships looked microscopic against the approaching fleet. One black vessel released a pulse wave across the graveyard. Entire wreck fields disintegrated instantly, not exploded, disassembled, metal separated into component particles, like sand stripped apart by invisible force. Ancient cruisers collapsed silently into drifting clouds of debris. Kael felt his stomach twist. What are they? No one answered immediately. Finally, Mara spoke quietly beside him. We call them harvesters. The name hit harder than expected. Not soldiers. Not conquerors. Something worse. The lift doors opened into a massive lower-deck chamber crowded with civilians from at least a dozen species. Refugees huddled beneath emergency blankets, while medics moved frantically between treatment stations. Children cried softly in corners beside exhausted parents. Kael stopped moving entirely. There were far more people aboard than he realized. Thousands, maybe. The Resolute Dawn was not a rescue ship. It was an Ark, and now it was trapped. A nearby human doctor looked up from treating a wounded refugee. Mara, we're overloaded down here. I know. We're running out of oxygen masks and nutrient packs. I know. And security says drones breached Deck 8. Mara closed her eyes briefly before forcing herself forward again. I know. Kael watched her carefully then. The exhaustion in her face finally made sense. These humans had not entered the Black Halo expanse at full strength. They were already carrying survivors from collapsing colonies while racing against a plague outbreak. And still they came for him. A complete stranger. The thought sat like poison in his chest. Another violent tremor knocked several civilians sideways as emergency lights flickered again. Then every display screen aboard the chamber suddenly activated simultaneously. The Black Fleet was transmitting once more. Inefficient species detected. Excessive resource protection confirmed. Humanity classified as systemic threat. Around Kael, frightened refugees stared at the words in silence. One small child asked a question no adult wanted to voice. What did humans do wrong? No one answered her, because the terrifying part was becoming obvious. Humanity's crime was compassion. Kael felt something inside him beginning to fracture. All his life, he had believed emotional attachment weakened civilizations. Coalition doctrine taught that survival required hard choices free from irrational empathy. Strong societies thrive because they sacrifice inefficient burdens. But humanity had done the opposite, and somehow they had become stronger for it. The chamber lights suddenly dimmed again before emergency shields slammed down across every entrance. Captain Ward's voice thundered across the intercom. All personnel braced for impact. Kael barely had time to react before the entire ship lurched sideways with catastrophic force. People screamed. Containers crashed loose. Several civilians hit the floor hard enough to break bones. The harvesters had opened fire. Kael grabbed the nearest support rail, while alarms exploded across the chamber. Hull ruptured Deck 5. Shields collapsing. Reactor cooling failure in progress. A security officer stumbled through one of the sealed entrances covered in blood. They're inside, he gasped. Then he collapsed. Panic finally erupted among the civilians. Some rushed toward emergency exits despite the lockdown barriers. Others began screaming at the human crew. One alien male grabbed a terrified child and demanded escape shuttles immediately. There aren't enough, someone shouted back. That single sentence shattered the room. Kael watched fear spread to refugees like fire through dry grass. Coalition logic surfaced instinctively inside him. Prioritize survival probability. Protect strongest sectors. Seal compromised decks. Abandon lower efficiency populations if necessary. The calculations formed automatically. And for one terrible moment, they made sense. His gaze drifted toward the overcrowded chamber around him. 6 civilians. Injured refugees. Children too weak to run. Species with no combat value whatsoever. Dead weight. The old Coalition instincts whispered coldly inside his mind. Save who can still save themselves. Then something impossible happened. One of the human engineers sprinted directly toward a collapsing support beam instead of away from it. Kael watched in disbelief as the man physically shoved 3 trapped refugees clear before the beam crushed his own legs beneath twisted metal. The engineer screamed once, then immediately started yelling at others to keep moving. Not save me. Move. Protect them. Kael froze. The logic did not work. The sacrifice achieved no measurable gain for the engineer himself. No reward. No survival advantage. Nothing efficient about it. Yet every human nearby reacted instantly, not with panic, with unity. 3 crew members rushed toward the trapped engineer despite ongoing hull breaches, while others formed barriers around frightened civilians. A medic threw herself across an injured refugee child during another impact wave without hesitation. Humans kept choosing each other, over and over, even now, especially now. And suddenly Kael understood the thing the Coalition had never grasped. Humanity was dangerous precisely because they refused to calculate human worth. That was why the galaxy feared them. That was why the Harvesters targeted them. The enemy outside did not see compassion as weakness. It saw it as rebellion. Then the chamber speakers crackled again. But this time the unknown voice spoke differently. Not to humanity. To Kael. Coalition, designate Kael 7. Your species understands efficiency. Why do you remain with the inefficient ones? Every terrified face in the chamber slowly turned toward him, and for the first time in his life, Kael did not know which side he belonged to anymore. The chamber fell silent after the transmission. Not fearful silence, expectant silence. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on Kael, while the red emergency lights pulsed across frightened faces and damaged walls. Somewhere above them, another explosion rippled through the Resolute Dawn hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling supports. But nobody looked away from him. The Harvesters were waiting for his answer, and somehow that terrified Kael more than death itself. A second transmission rolled through the chamber, deeper this time, almost mechanical enough to feel ancient. Inefficient systems collapse naturally. Survival requires selection. Your species accepts this truth. Return to logical alignment. Kael felt every lesson from his childhood rising inside him like ghosts. Efficiency preserves civilization. Emotion corrupts survival. Weakness spreads collapse. His people believe those principles so completely they build entire world around them. Cities optimized by productivity value. Medical systems ranked by societal contribution. Food allocation determined by predictive usefulness. Kael once believed it too, until humans arrived. Until he watched exhausted medics comfort terrified strangers during a massacre they could have avoided by abandoning them. Until he saw wounded crew members crawl back toward danger because someone else still needed help. Until he realized humanity's strength did not come from logic. It came from refusing to let fear decide who deserved to live. The ship suddenly lurched violently again. This time the floor beneath them cracked open. Screams erupted as civilians stumbled backward from widening fractures splitting across the chamber plating. Emergency lights flickered wildly, while automated systems shouted overlapping warnings. Core stability failure. Reactor containment compromised. Captain Ward's voice cut through the chaos instantly. All hands, this is the captain. Enemy vessels have breached reactor shielding. We are losing core stability. Kael saw the reaction across the human crew immediately. Not despair. Preparation. They already understood what the announcement meant. The Resolute Dawn was dying. A tactical display ignited across the chamber wall, showing the external battle for the first time in full. Kael's breath caught. The Black Fleet surrounded them completely now. Dozens of harvester vessels drifted around the graveyard, while pulse waves systematically dismantled debris fields and disabled defensive systems. The Coalition ship Talon crest was barely visible through the storm, its hull shattered and burning across multiple sections. And still it fought, because retreat no longer existed. The humans stood alone at the center of a closing execution ring. A nearby officer rushed toward Mara, carrying a damaged datapad. Emergency evacuation routes are collapsing. How bad? Not enough shuttles. The officer hesitated before continuing. Even if we abandon lower decks, maybe 30% survive. Kael saw the numbers hit every human nearby. 30%. Coalition doctrine would already consider that acceptable under extinction conditions. Save the viable population. Preserve strongest survival chains. Minimize total loss. The mathematics were obvious. Captain Ward appeared across the chamber monitors moments later, standing on the bridge beneath flashing crimson lights. Blood ran down one side of his forehead, but his voice remained terrifyingly calm. All civilian sectors listened carefully. We are attempting emergency breakthrough toward the neutron corridor beyond the graveyard. Murmurs spread instantly through the chamber. Kael felt cold shock ripple through him. The neutron corridor was suicide, a collapsing magnetic fracture zone near the edge of the black halo expanse, where gravity storms shredded most navigation systems apart. Even military fleets avoided it because calculations became impossible inside the distortion field. No logical captain would attempt passage, which meant humanity absolutely would. The corridor cannot support a ship this size, Kael said aloud. Mara looked toward him sharply. You know the corridor? I studied gravitational salvage routes during engineering certification. Kael stared at the tactical map. The only way through is reducing ship mass below critical threshold. Silence hit instantly. Every engineer nearby understood the implication. To survive the corridor, the Resolute Dawn would need to abandon entire sections of the vessel, including civilians. The old coalition instincts returned immediately. Cut lower decks. Detach refugee sectors. Preserve command structure. Mathematically, it was the only viable solution. Kael opened his mouth, then stopped, because he already knew what Captain Ward would say. The captain confirmed it seconds later. We are not abandoning civilian sectors. Several crew members stared at the monitor in disbelief. Sir, one officer protested carefully. If we maintain full mass, corridor collapse probability exceeds 94%. Ward nodded once. I know. Then we have to reduce weight. No. The bridge fell silent. Kael felt something painful twist inside his chest. The humans truly meant it. Even now, even facing extinction, they still refused to choose who mattered less. Suddenly another explosion thundered somewhere deep within the ship. The monitors flickered violently before switching camera feeds automatically. Deck 12. Harvester drones flooded the corridor in swarms of black metallic limbs, while human security teams fought desperately to slow them down. Kael watched one wounded officer trigger a manual blast door collapse on himself just to trap the drones long enough for civilians to escape behind him. Not one human hesitated to protect strangers. Not one. Then Captain Ward looked directly into the monitor feed. We need another solution, he said quietly. And without warning, every eye in the chamber turned toward Kael again. Not because he was expendable, because they believed he could help. The realization struck like physical force. Humans trusted him, even after everything. Kael stared back at the tactical display, while calculations raced violently through his mind. Gravitational stress ratios, mass distribution equations, neutron turbulence collapse patterns. Then suddenly, he saw it. Not a logical solution, an impossible one. A maneuver so irrational no coalition AI would even consider it, which meant the harvesters probably would not either. Kael moved toward the central console before his fear could stop him. There is a way, he said. Mara blinked. What? The graveyard. Another explosion rocked the chamber. Kael pointed toward the drifting debris fields surrounding the Black Fleet. The wreckage still carries residual mass signatures from ancient war drives. If the Resolute Dawn detonates at external reactor vents at the exact moment the neutron corridor collapses, you trigger a chain gravity surge. One engineer breathed. Kael nodded rapidly now. The debris field would scatter into the corridor and distort the harvester targeting systems. Another officer stared at him in disbelief. That maneuver could tear the ship apart. Yes. And the navigation timing would need to be perfect. Yes. And if the corridor collapses too early, we all die. Silence spread again. Then slowly and possibly, several humans started smiling. Not because the plan was safe, because it gave everyone a chance. Mara looked at Kael like she was seeing him for the first time. That is the stupidest survival strategy I've ever heard. Kael swallowed once. I learned it from humans. Before anyone could answer, the bridge alarm suddenly erupted at full volume. Captain Ward spun toward someone off-screen. What happened? A terrified voice answered immediately. Direct strike on the bridge. The monitor feed shook violently. Then Kael saw Captain Elias Ward collapse out of frame as blood sprayed across the command console behind him. And for the first time since humanity arrived, the Resolute Dawn lost its captain. For one terrible second, the entire ship seemed to stop breathing. The bridge feed dissolved into static, while emergency alarms screamed across every deck of the Resolute Dawn. Crew members froze mid-motion. Civilians stared silently at the flickering monitors. Even the distant sounds of battle outside felt strangely muted beneath the crushing realization spreading through the ship. Captain Elias Ward was down. Kael felt it instantly, not because he knew humans well enough to understand their military hierarchy, because he understood what Ward represented. The humans aboard this ship did not function through fear or efficiency or survival mathematics. They followed belief, trust, shared purpose, and somehow, against every law of logic Kael had ever known, that fragile irrational system had held together against impossible odds. Now the person holding it together might be dead. A voice suddenly cracked across the comms. "Bridge to all sectors," someone shouted breathlessly. "Captain Ward is alive." Repeat, the captain is alive but critically injured. The reaction inside the chamber stunned Kael. The humans did not cheer. They moved. Instantly, officers resumed directing evacuations. Medics grabbed emergency packs and sprinted for lift shafts. Engineers returned to collapsing consoles without hesitation. Fear still existed in their faces, but it no longer controlled them. Their captain had fallen. The mission had not. Kael realized then that humanity's greatest strength was not courage. It was continuity. Every human aboard that ship carried the same fire inside them. Mara grabbed his arm sharply. "Can your maneuver actually work?" Kael looked toward the tactical displays, showing the neutron corridor destabilizing near the edge of the graveyard. Harvester vessels continued closing around them while pulse waves shattered drifting wreckage into expanding clouds of molten debris. "No," he answered honestly. Mara blinked once. Then he continued. "But humans would try it anyway." For the first time since the nightmare began, Mara laughed. Exhausted, broken, half terrified, but real. "Good," she said, "because we're out of better ideas." The next 10 minutes became controlled madness. The Resolute Dawn accelerated directly toward the neutron corridor, while harvester ships opened fire from every direction. Entire sections of the human vessel tore apart under the bombardment. Kael watched debris and atmosphere vent endlessly into space through shattered hull breaches. Still the ship kept moving. Human crews manually sealed collapsing corridors with portable welders, while medics treated wounded beside exposed bulkheads. Refugees from species that once hated each other now worked together, carrying emergency supplies through smoke-filled passages. The harvesters had expected panic. Instead, they found unity. Kael stood inside the navigation core surrounded by human engineers running calculations faster than the dying systems could process them. None of them treated him like an outsider anymore. No suspicion, no hesitation, only trust. That realization nearly broke him. A coalition officer would have questioned his motives, verified probabilities, protected command authority. Humans simply handed him control. Gravity surge building. One engineer warned. Corridor collapse in 90 seconds. Another explosion ripped through the stern sections hard enough to dim every light aboard the ship. Somewhere behind them, thousands of tons of structure peeled away into space. Kael steadied himself against the console. "Prepare external reactor venting." "You're sure?" "No," Kael admitted. The engineer grinned anyway. Very human answer. Outside the ship, the neutron corridor began collapsing. Reality itself twisted near the fracture zone. Gravitational waves bent entire debris fields into spiraling currents, while shattered wreckage accelerated unpredictably through the storm. The harvesters advanced without slowing, their black holes gliding through the chaos like executioners entering a grave. Then Captain Ward's voice returned across the comms. Weak, ragged, still steady. All hands, he coughed painfully. It's been an honor. Kael closed his eyes briefly. Not fear, not surrender, just gratitude. Humans really were insane. Captain, Kael transmitted quietly, permission to do something extremely irrational. A faint laugh crackled through the damaged comm system. Granted. Kael slammed his hand against the reactor release controls. The Resolute Dawn detonated its external venting arrays all at once. A tidal wave of energy erupted behind the ship. Ancient wreckage fields instantly ignited across the graveyard as dormant war drive cores overloaded in sequence. Thousands of shattered vessels exploded into expanding gravitational debris storms that slammed directly into the neutron corridor. Space itself twisted violently. The harvesters reacted too late. For the first time since appearing, the Black Fleet lost formation. Several vessels vanished instantly into collapsing gravity fractures, while others collided with debris fields moving at relativistic speeds. One massive harvester ship folded inward, like crushed metal, before disappearing beneath a wave of distorted light. Kael stared in disbelief. The impossible maneuver was working, not because it was efficient, because no machine intelligence designed around perfect logic could predict people willing to risk everything for each other. The Resolute Dawn surged through the collapsing corridor, while the remaining harvesters struggled to adapt to the chaos spreading around them. Then suddenly, silence. No weapons fire. No alarms. The star stabilized outside the viewport as the human ship finally emerged beyond the edge of the black halo expanse. Alive. For several seconds, nobody aboard the command deck moved. Then one exhausted engineer started laughing. Another followed. Then the entire room erupted. Humans embraced each other openly, while refugees cried in relief across every surviving deck. Wounded soldiers collapsed beside civilians they had protected. Medics wept openly while continuing treatment. And through all of it, Kael stood motionless before the stars. Because he finally understood. The galaxy had spent centuries believing survival depended on calculating value. Humanity proved survival actually depended on refusing to. Weeks later, the story of the Resolute Dawn spread across every major system. A human rescue ship carrying plague survivors had entered a death zone to save one abandoned stranger, then fought an extinction fleet rather than surrender civilians. Entire governments dismissed the reports as propaganda at first, until refugees from 12 different species confirmed every detail. Questions began spreading afterward. Dangerous questions. Why had humanity advanced so quickly despite ignoring accepted efficiency laws? Why did human-controlled systems report higher cooperation rates, lower civil collapse, and faster recovery after disasters? And most terrifying of all, what if compassion was not weakness? What if it was evolution? Kael stood silently aboard the rebuilt observation deck months later, when a new distress beacon echoed through the ship. Several nearby crew members immediately turned toward the signal. No hesitation. No debate. Already moving. Kael watched the flashing coordinates for one long moment before activating the comm system himself. Unknown vessel. He transmitted calmly into stars. This is the Terran rescue ship Resolute Dawn. He smiled faintly as human engines ignited around him. We're coming for you.